They said I would never have the courage to challenge the mining giants who've been bleeding Africa dry for decades. European executives called me another young African leader making empty threats. Mining lobby groups dismissed me as a soldier who doesn't understand economics. Even some of my own advisors whispered I was moving too fast, too dangerously against powers too big to fight. They were all wrong, because while they were busy underestimating me, I was busy dismantling their entire extraction empire across my continent. And what I'm about to tell you isn't just what happened in Burkina Faso, it's the blueprint for how Africa finally stops being the world's mining colony. My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and this is the story of how I declared economic war on Europe's African mining empire. Let me start with something they don't want you to know. For decades, while African leaders were signing development deals and shaking hands for photo ops, European mining companies were building something else entirely. A network of extraction operations that took our gold, our resources, our wealth, and shipped it straight to European banks. They thought we were too poor to fight back, too desperate to say no, too divided to reclaim what was ours. I noticed everything. Do you want to know what really triggered my decision to act? 3 weeks ago, during my live radio interview with Radio Burkina, I said something that sent shockwaves through every European mining boardroom from London to Paris. Il y a un bon nombre de permis que moi j'ai déjà retirés et on va continuer de retirer. Translation: there are a good number of permits that I have already withdrawn, and we will continue to withdraw. But here's the part that made European executives realize this wasn't just political posturing. I followed that statement with something that changed everything. Pourquoi on sait exploiter l'or et qu'on doit donc laisser des multinationales venir exploiter notre or? Translation: why do we know how to exploit gold, and we should let multinationals come exploit our gold? That night, mining company stock prices began to drop. Emergency board meetings were called across Europe because they finally understood this wasn't a negotiation. This was a declaration of economic independence. What I revealed in that interview wasn't just about permits. It was about exposing a system that has kept Africa poor while making Europe rich for over a century. Let me break down exactly what these development partnerships really look like. European companies extract billions in gold from African soil. They pay minimal taxes to African governments. Raw materials shipped to Europe for processing. Finished products sold back to Africa at massive markups. Profits flow to European shareholders. Africa remains a supplier of raw materials. During the interview, I explained something that every African leader knows, but few have the courage to say publicly. Ces mêmes personnes n'hésitent pas à coaliser donc avec les forces impérialistes qui ne passent leur temps donc à nous aider, à nous appauvrir. Translation: these same people don't hesitate to ally with imperialist forces who spend their time impoverishing us. This isn't anti-European sentiment. This is pro-African economics, and the numbers prove it. Before my permit withdrawals, Burkina Faso was a major gold producer, yet had a 40% poverty rate. Mining companies made billions in annual profits. Local communities received minimal benefit from resources beneath their feet. After implementing SOPAMI and APEC state control, gold revenues flowing to Burkina Treasury. Local Europe for processing. Finished products sold back to Africa at massive markups. Profits flow to European shareholders. Africa remains a supplier of raw materials. During the interview, I explained something that every African leader knows, but few have the courage to say publicly. Ces mêmes personnes n'hésitent pas à coaliser donc avec les forces impérialistes qui ne passent leur temps donc à nous aider, à nous appauvrir. Translation: these same people don't hesitate to ally with imperialist forces who spend their time impoverishing us. This isn't anti-European sentiment. This is pro-African economics, and the numbers prove it. Before my permit withdrawals, Burkina Faso was a maze who spend their time donc avec les forces impérialistes qui ne passent leur temps donc during the It was about exposing a system that has kept Africa poor while making Europe rich for over a century. Let me break down exactly what these development partnerships really look like. European companies extract billions in gold from African soil. They pay minimal taxes to African governments. Raw materials shipped to Europe for processing. Finished products sold back to Africa at massive markups. Profits flow to European shareholders. Africa remains a supplier of raw materials. During the interview, I explained something that every African leader knows, but few have the courage to say publicly. Ces mêmes personnes n'hésitent pas à coaliser donc avec les forces impérialistes qui ne passent leur temps donc à nous aider, à nous appauvrir. Translation: these same people don't hesitate to ally with imperialist forces who spend their time impoverishing us. This isn't anti-European sentiment. This is pro-African economics, and the numbers prove it. Before my permit withdrawals, Burkina Faso was a major gold producer, yet had a 40% poverty rate. Mining companies made billions in annual profits. Local communities received minimal benefit from resources beneath their feet. After implementing SOPAMI and APEC state control, gold revenues flowing to Burkina Treasury. Local employment in processing, not just extraction. Investment in schools, hospitals, infrastructure, resources serving the people who live above them. Within hours of my radio interview, something unprecedented began happening across European financial markets. Mining company executives who had operated in Africa for decades were calling emergency meetings. Stock analysts were downgrading African mining investments. European government officials were making frantic diplomatic calls. Because they realized what I had just announced wasn't limited to Burkina Faso. During the interview, I made it clear this was part of a continental strategy. Il y avait des permis miniers ici, qui avaient été donnés à des puissances aussi qui refusent, car même de nous accompagner. Translation: there were mining permits here that had been given to powers that even refused to accompany us. The message was simple. If you won't respect African sovereignty, you lose access to African resources. But here's what really scared European mining executives. I wasn't acting alone. Mali's leadership had been watching our model. Niger was evaluating their own mining partnerships. Guinea was conducting audits of foreign extraction operations. For the first time in decades, African countries were coordinating economic policy instead of competing against each other for foreign investment. Burkina Faso withdraws European mining permits. Mali begins reviewing foreign extraction deals. Niger audits multinational mining operations. Continental resource sovereignty becomes reality. European companies that had treated African governments as individual negotiating partners suddenly faced a unified continental approach. Their divide and conquer strategy was failing. During my radio interview, I was asked about Thomas Sankara's political orientation discourse. My response revealed the philosophical foundation of everything we're doing. Thomas Sankara était trop en avance sur son temps, et je pense que tout ça, ça fait qu'il n'a pas été compris. Translation: Thomas Sankara was too ahead of his time, and I think that's what made him not understood. Sankara understood 40 years ago what we're implementing today, that African resources must serve African development. Sankara's vision in 1983. African self-reliance over foreign dependency. Resource sovereignty over extraction partnerships. Continental unity over individual competition. Our implementation in 2025. SOPAMI and APEC replacing foreign mining companies. AES Confederation coordinating resource policy. Made in Burkina, prioritizing local production. The interview revealed how we're adapting Sankara's vision to modern realities. Il y a certaines choses en son temps 83 qui ne peuvent plus se faire aujourd'hui, mais nous l'adaptons au fur et à mesure. Translation: there are certain things from 1983 that can't be done today, but we adapt them progressively. European leaders called Sankara a dangerous radical in 1983. They're using the same language about me in 2025. The difference is that now we have the unity, the resources, and the continental support to make economic independence reality. The most important revelation from my radio interview wasn't about what we're taking away from European companies. It was about what we're building to replace them. Si nous voulons que notre patrie soit indépendante, si nous voulons notre souveraineté, si nous voulons que les Burkinabés mangent à leur faim. Translation: if we want our homeland to be independent, if we want our sovereignty, if we want Burkinabé to eat their fill. This is about more than mining permits. This is about economic dignity. SOPAMI, state-owned mining serving national development. APEC, agricultural transformation reducing food imports. AES, continental cooperation replacing foreign dependency. Local production replacing foreign imports. During the interview, I explained our Made in Burkina policy. Si quelqu'un veut importer un produit, peu importe le produit, tant qu'il y a des Burkinabés qui le fabriquent, il est obligé d'abord de prendre au Burkina. Translation: if someone wants to import a product, whatever the product, as long as there are Burkinabés who make it, they are obliged to first take from Burkina. This isn't just economic policy, this is economic revolution. Youth employment in production, not migration to Europe. Local industries growing instead of importing everything. African solutions to African challenges. Continental markets serving continental development. 6 months after my radio interview revealed our mining sovereignty strategy, I can report that Burkina Faso's mineral wealth is serving Burkina Faso's people for the first time in our history. European mining executives are learning what I told them would happen: respect African sovereignty or lose access to African resources. But the lesson for other African leaders is simple. Economic independence isn't just possible, it's profitable. The lesson for foreign powers is equally clear. The era of extraction without partnership is ending. We are no longer the continent that says yes to exploitation disguised as development. We are no longer the market that accepts any terms because we believe we have no alternatives. We are the continent that controls our own resources, builds our own industries, and determines our own economic destiny. European mining companies can adapt to this new reality, or they can be replaced by partners who respect African sovereignty. The choice, as always, is theirs. But understand that our choice has already been made. We choose economic independence. We choose resource sovereignty. We choose an Africa that works for Africans first. Everything else is negotiable, but what happened next exceeded even my expectations. Within weeks of my radio interview, something unprecedented began spreading across the continent like wildfire. Nous sommes en train de recruter. On est à plus de 30 000 personnes recrutées presque dans l'armée seulement. Translation: we are recruiting. We're at more than 30,000 people recruited in the army alone. This wasn't just about mining anymore. This was about total African transformation. Chad's president called me personally 3 days after the interview aired. Ibrahim, he said, your mining model, we want to implement it here. Guinea's leadership reached out through secure channels. They had been monitoring our Sopami operations and wanted technical assistance to establish their own state mining company. Even countries that had been cautious about challenging Western economic partnerships were privately asking for consultations on resource sovereignty. The African Union, for the first time in its history, was discussing continental mining policy coordination. Not just cooperation, coordination. The difference is everything. 12 African countries reviewing foreign mining contracts, 8 nations implementing local-first purchasing policies, 6 countries establishing state-owned mining enterprises, continental resource-sharing agreements under development. But here's what really sends panic through European boardrooms every night. This is just the beginning. During my interview, I mentioned something that most people overlooked. 2025 is decisive, and we are going in that direction so that we can reconquérir les 30% restants. Translation: 2025 is decisive, and we will go in this direction so that we can reconquer the remaining 30%. I wasn't just talking about territory. I was talking about economic territory, resource sovereignty, continental independence. The most significant change isn't happening in African capitals. It's happening in European financial centers, American corporate headquarters, and Chinese investment firms. For the first time in centuries, African countries are setting the terms of global resource engagement instead of accepting whatever terms are offered. Transparent partnerships or no partnerships. African processing before export. Technology transfer requirements. Environmental protection standards. Community benefit guarantees. Companies that refuse these terms are discovering something they never expected. They can be replaced. Chinese firms, despite their own complicated history in Africa, have been surprisingly willing to meet our transparency requirements. Russian partners have agreed to full audit processes without complaint. Even some European companies are rebranding themselves as African sovereignty compliant to distinguish themselves from competitors who refuse to adapt. The market is rewarding transparency and punishing extraction capitalism exactly as we intended. Meanwhile, the mining companies that once operated freely across Africa without oversight are finding themselves locked out of an increasing number of markets, not because of political hostility, but because they refuse to meet the sovereignty standards that are becoming continental norms. Their business model assumed African governments would always prioritize short-term revenue over long-term independence. That assumption is proving catastrophically expensive. European mining executives learned this lesson the hard way. They won't be the last to learn it. The question isn't whether other global powers will respect African resource sovereignty. The question is how much it will cost them to learn the same lesson these mining giants learned, because one way or another, they will learn it. The age of African economic colonialism is ending. What comes next depends entirely on how quickly the rest of the world adapts to that reality. But for young Africans watching this, understand something crucial. This transformation didn't happen because I'm special. It happened because Africa is ready. Ready to control our own resources. Ready to build our own industries, ready to determine our own economic future. The only question left is, are you ready to be part of building the Africa that works for Africans first? This is Ibrahim Traoré, and this is how Africa reclaimed its economic independence. The revolution continues.